Clare O'Neil, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David. So great to be with you.
So we've got competing housing plans today. I'll get your thoughts on what the coalition's offering, but let's start with your plan. Just explain to us what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, thanks, David. So we've got a housing crisis in our country that's been a generation in the making, and this is today a life-defining issue for literally millions of people who live in our country. We came to government 3 years ago after a decade of complete neglect of this problem. Remember that for most of the time the Liberals were in office, they didn't even have a housing minister. And we've built from those ashes the most bold and ambitious Australian government housing policy that we've seen since the Second World War. Anthony Albanese will announce today that in a second term our government will go further on housing, much further. And we're going to do that by introducing two game-changing measures that are focused completely on trying to back young people to get into a home of their own. The first is that for the first time in Australian history, the Commonwealth will partner with the states to build 100,000 homes exclusively to sell to first home buyers. So those first home buyers won't be competing with property investors or people of other generations. It's just their direct shot at owning a home of their own. But we know that we don't want young people around this country waiting for us to build our way out of this crisis. So we're also offering meaningful short-term relief by saying to every young person in the country, our government will back you to get into a home of your own with a deposit of just 5%. And this is all about offering that generation the opportunity to be paying off their own mortgage, not someone else's.
So I'll come to the housing supply, the 100,000 new homes for first home buyers, but on the demand side, I suppose, making this deposit guarantee more widely available to all first home buyers. It's currently, I think, available for $50,000 a year, but not all of those places are taken up, I think. So how many will now take it up, do you expect?
So we've got a scheme where we've increased the size from about 10,000 a year up to 50,000 a year. The Treasury estimates tell us that this might increase to about 80,000 homes a year. And I really want to make your viewers understand the impact of this. One of the things I worry about in the housing conversation is that the older generations are not hearing the level of distress that young people around our country are in. We've got a generation of young people who are putting off the decision to have children or deciding not to undertake further study or working in jobs that aren't right for them just because they can't get into stable housing. This policy reduces the amount of time it takes a young couple to save for a deposit from between 10 and 11 years all the way back to 2 to 3 years.
So if you have more buyers, and the estimate's around 80,000 a year, is that going to push up demand, push up house prices?
Well, look, the proof is in the pudding there, David. This is a scheme that's already in operation and it's proven to work. We've gone from 10,000 homes a year to 50,000 homes a year under this scheme with no discernible impact on prices. So if I can just help you understand why that's the case. The scheme doesn't allow people to take on more borrowings. The serviceability requirements that the bank will put on you are exactly the same. So when we've seen sort of similar schemes modelled, the Help to Buy scheme, for example, another of our policies will bring an additional 10,000 people into the market each year. The Grattan Institute has modelled the price impact of that to be $137 on a $700,000 mortgage. So these are the kind of numbers that we're talking about. And I just say to you, it's time for the Australian government to step up and back in this young generation.
All right.
Their housing opportunities are very different from anything
We'll
that's
get to their
before
plans,
them.
but just to be clear, is the Treasury modelling on this idea that it won't impact house prices?
It won't have a significant impact on house prices.
Not a significant impact?
That's
is that
correct.
A small impact?
It's not a significant impact on house prices for the reasons that I've just explained. Just okay. Understand, David, that we have 700,000 property transactions happening in Australia each year. We're talking about a pretty narrow band of new first home buyers in the market. And David, can I just say, we want more first home buyers in the market. If we're not willing to accept that, then we're saying basically we're not going to do anything to help these young people and our government won't tolerate that.
So the other part of what you're doing today, and this is I think the more significant part really, on the supply side, $10 billion to build 100,000 new homes exclusively for first home buyers. Is this spending from the budget bottom line, or is this a new off-budget scheme that you're going to set up?
Yeah, it's not an off-budget scheme. This is money that will come directly out of the budget. It's $2 billion in grants and then $8 billion where we will either deliver zero interest loans to the states or we will take equity stakes in new projects. Now, again, we're building on something that's working really well here. In South Australia, for example, Renewal SA undertakes these type of developments. What's missing from the state development agencies is the capital flow. And we are going to put $10 billion into this project because we want to give young people a direct shot at home ownership. The big issue we have with supply at the moment, we've got an overall problem with supply, but the biggest problem is at the entry-level end of the market, and that's where we'll be intervening to bring that additional supply online.
How long will it take to get those 100,000 homes?
It's an 8-year program. We will, day one, if our government is re-elected, we'll sit down with the states and start to map out where these projects will be built. They'll involve state, local and federal land. They'll involve some private developers and some state agencies. We will start turning sods on these developments in the 26-7 financial year, and then first homeowners moving in the year after.
So it is going to take a while.
Well, building new homes takes time, David.
Okay.
The average time to build an apartment building in this country is 3 years. If I could, our government's doing a lot to truncate those timelines, but it is the reality of the situation. Now, that doesn't take away from the importance of building supply. We have a housing crisis in this country because for 40 years we've not been building enough homes, and our government is stepping up and doing something very meaningful and genuine about building that supply back up.
Okay, so the government will take equity, you said. Government's getting into the private property development market, essentially. This is not something we've seen. Well, have we ever seen this before?
Not of this nature. I mean, you've had Commonwealth and state governments building en masse housing, that's public housing for affordable rentals. We're talking about something quite different here. It is an article of faith in the Labor Party that ordinary people in our country should be able to have the opportunity to own their own home. So that's not always possible in Australia today.
So the government becoming a private property developer, does that mean you're competing against the private market? If the government's involved in a project on one side of the street and there's a commercial development going across the other side of the street, are you in competition?
Well, the housing that we most need right now in Australia is not getting built. So we're not competing. That the housing that's being built today is not affordable for most young people who are entering the market, and that's the real problem. What we're doing is supplementing supply at the affordable end of the market, and that's where it's really needed.
But why isn't the private market able to provide this housing?
Yeah,
What's the problem?
It's a really important question that just goes to the economics of what's going on in housing at the moment. The fundamental problem we have is that the cost of building is too high, and it can't be met by people who are borrowing money and buying homes. Now, the Liberal approach is just to stand back and say, oh, that's the operation of the private market.
Sorry,
we can't get into that.
We will get to the Liberal approach. But if the problem is the cost of construction is too high, how will the government-built homes be cheaper?
Well, lots of different ways. One of them is that we've got access to land that's available from state, local and federal government. We can also ask the states to do things like significantly truncate the timelines. So
can't you do that anyway? Why aren't you doing that already?
In Renewal SA projects, for example, they can shave a year off just the development process. We're making, massive investment in skills and other things to make these projects cheaper. And then, of course, there'll be an impact where we're subsidising some of the cost of housing.
But why aren't you doing these things with the states already?
David, can I just clarify with you? The alternative to doing this is that we're not going to be building the housing that we need as a country. I mean, you're asking me very appropriate questions here, but just understand that if government goes back to the way of the Liberals, has the hands-off approach where we're not going to have anything to do with this problem, the housing crisis is going to get worse. This is our pathway to make a difference to this market.
I've heard that point, and we will get to the Liberals. But why aren't you telling the states to fix these things already? Why does the government need to be in the private market building homes?
Because look at the result when we're not rolling up our sleeves and getting involved. We've got a 40-year problem here where our country has not been, number one, building enough homes, but importantly, building homes at affordable prices that new entrants can afford. The only answer to this problem is for the government to actually get bloody active on this.
Okay,
and to watch an Australian government with such neglect, not even have a housing minister for 6 years, well, the result, of course, is that all the affordability metrics got worse. Our government is going to roll up its sleeves and get involved. That is the only answer for the housing crisis confronting our country.
So will these government-built homes be more affordable? Will they be cheaper than what the private sector is building?
Yes.
How much cheaper?
Well, we need to negotiate this on a state-by-state basis, but in the South Australian example, we're building homes at that affordable entry level of the market, somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000.
Right.
And, it's pretty hard to find new affordable housing at that price in most parts of the country right now.
Clearly everyone's going to want the cheaper government-built house than the more expensive private market-built house or apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So who gets to buy the cheaper government-built house? There's about 110,000 first home buyers a year at the moment. You're saying you'll have 100,000 over 8 years of these government-built homes. Who gets them?
Well, the eligibility criteria will be these are available to Australian citizens, they're available to first homeowners only, and they'll be for people who are going to live in their homes, not use them as an investment property. We'll negotiate state-by-state criteria that's appropriate for those different markets. Income levels are very different from state to state.
So they will be income tested?
In all likelihood, they'll be income tested. In South Australia, for example, they've got income caps that are around 115,000 for singles and a bit higher for couples.
So this will be lower income earners only, low and middle income earners?
We're targeting people who are not otherwise going to have an opportunity for first home ownership. And that's what I think people expect of the Australian government. We need to support people. 2 generations ago in this country, an ordinary working family could afford to get into home ownership and give their children the safety and security and stability that they deserve. And that's not always possible today, and that's where we're intervening.
That we've seen plenty of building companies collapse over recent years. If you now have the government coming into the private market as a builder, a project developer, is there a risk that other building companies are going to go, well, hang on, we can't compete with that. You're offering cheaper construction and got the deals with the states to get all this on the market much cheaper than them. Are we going to lead to more building company collapses?
Well, we'll be leaning on those building companies to help us build the homes, David. We're not going to start an Australian government building company to build these houses. Right. We're going to be building partnerships with state governments and with private developers to support them to build the stock that's desperately needed around our country. Okay. And I'll say to you again, the alternative to the government rolling up its sleeves and engaging on this is to do nothing at all about the supply problem. That's what the Liberals are offering, and that is a pathway and a road to a worsening housing crisis in this country.
And just one more on your policy before we get to the Liberal one. The skilled workers, we know the industry's crying out for skilled workers, can't find enough. This is one of the big problems. Where are they going to come from under your plan? Are you willing to bring more into the country?
Well, it's a really important point, David. And, we arrived in government not just to find a, pretty terrible housing crisis, but also a dearth of skills in our country after a decade of underinvestment. One of the biggest things our government is doing about this is fee-free TAFE. 500,000 Australians have bettered themselves and their communities through fee-free TAFE. 40,000 of those have been in construction workers. We've also got a program to make sure that construction-based apprentices are doing their apprenticeships in residential construction. And of course, you mentioned the migration system there. Look, we need to pull every lever that we have here.
So bring more in?
We have a 40-year-old housing crisis in this country because there's lots of things going wrong at the same time. And I hope what you see as a commentator here is that our government is deadly serious about this. We have tackled this problem from every angle, and now we're adding these really game-changing new dimensions, just focusing on first-time buyers.
Will you bring in more construction workers?
Well, we have a demand-driven migration system. In the last year, we brought about 10,000 workers into the country who have construction skills, and I'd imagine the numbers will continue along those lines.
So not an increase?
Well, sorry, David, the migration system doesn't work that way. The government doesn't set how many construction workers come in each year. It's a demand-driven system that brought in 10,000 places last year.
Let's look at the Liberals' plan today. I appreciate this is breaking news. Jacob Gruber just brought us the story a little earlier. We're yet to see all the details. But what do you think of the idea of letting first home buyers deduct from their tax their mortgage interest payments for 5 years on a newly built home?
David, I think it's a bit early for me to comment on it. I haven't seen anything on this proposal other than the fact that it seems to have emerged and perhaps not gone through a proper shadow cabinet process. Look, I think what we've seen today is public policy on the run for a campaign on the slide here. It's been chaotic. The opposition's changed their position on critical elements of their policy from day to day. So let's see if this is still their policy by the end of the week. Maybe then we'll take it seriously.
Okay, but as a housing minister, have you ever thought of this idea, looked at this idea?
Look, the problem that we have in housing Australians today is that we're not building enough homes quickly enough, and really the serious answer to this is fixing that problem.
But if you look at this idea,
that's where you see our $43 billion investment in trying to build more homes around our country.
I'm just asking whether you haven't criticised this idea. I've noticed. Have you ever thought about it?
Sorry, David. All I know about this is that it's come out this morning, so I think it's a bit unfair for me to have a highly considered opinion about what's gone on.
Yeah.
It's not something that we've looked at. Our focus is on the actual fix of the problem here, and the actual fix, whatever you want to say about it, is that we need to build more homes more quickly. We have a $43 billion plan on the table, which is building more homes, getting renters a better deal, and getting more Australians into home ownership. And my message to you today is we've got a lot more work to do in a second term with these game-changing reforms to help first home buyers.
I'll just try one more time though. Are you critical at all of the idea of mortgage deductions for first home buyers?
Well, I mean, a couple of things I'd just say. We're probably talking about a pretty small segment of the market here, only first home buyers who are only buying into what are actually quite expensive new builds. But we need to look at the numbers here and understand what it is the coalition's proposing. One thing I just will say is that we've got to help young people get into home ownership, and I'm not sure how this policy is going to assist us to do that. The difficulty they're facing is saving a deposit, and that's why our 5% deposit for first homeowners across the country is such a game-changing thing for young people.
And on the tax break that Peter Dutton will promise today for low and middle income earners, you have a modest tax cut, but that applies to everyone, even on high incomes. His is more squarely targeted at, I guess, the sort of people you represent in your electorate. Do you think it will have appeal?
Well, look, I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, the Liberals were crowing about fiscal responsibility, and now they've put forward something which is going to cost $10 billion to give 1 year's worth of relief. I mean, only the Liberals could come up with something that is such a short-term support at such a cost to the community. And I just say I think you've got two really competing things that are demonstrating the choice at this election. We've got one party here that's building Australia's future, tackling the biggest social and economic problems that we face, and another that's going to provide short-term relief just for a year. And don't forget, they're going to raise your taxes after that. So I don't think it's going to have much truck.
Housing Minister Clare O'Neil, appreciate you joining us with some breaking news and a big day for your portfolio. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, David. Appreciate it.